The most important student of Socrates was a philosopher named Plato. And most of what we actually know about Socrates comes from Plato because Socrates never wrote anything down. Plato greatly admired his teacher. In fact, most of his great philosophical works are not essays or direct arguments, but actually imaginary dialogues featuring Socrates as the main character. In a typical dialogue by Plato, Socrates, as the main character, would ask somebody a question about love or truth or goodness or beauty, justice, some difficult concept. The person would give their response, and then Socrates, using his Socratic method, would try to come to a deeper, better understanding of the concept in question. Plato's philosophical dialogues are often considered the most important works in the history of philosophy. One 20th century philosopher, Alfred North Whitehead, once described the entirety of Western philosophy as a series of footnotes to Plato. But what was Plato's philosophy? Perhaps the most important concept to understand when it comes to Plato is what is called the world of forms. To understand what Plato means by forms, let's start with one example: love. The word love has a lot of different meanings. It could describe the love between a husband and a wife. It could describe the love between two close friends. It could describe the love between a parent and a child, or even the love that someone feels towards their home country. Now, let me ask you an important question. What do you think the perfect or ideal form of love is? Do you think romantic love is the ideal form of love? Is it divine love, the love that somebody has towards God? Or maybe you think it's parental love, the love that a mother has towards her child. What do you think? What does the ideal form of love actually look like? What does it not look like? For Plato, understanding the ideal or perfect form of something is actually the most important step. Once we understand what the ideal form of something is, we can judge and improve upon what we already have. How are we matching up with our ideal? How are we falling short? If we have an ideal, we have something to aspire towards, something we can strive to achieve. If, for example, we understand that in an ideal society, the strong should not oppress the weak, then we have a clear understanding of how we should help each other in this world and not allow any injustice. These ideal forms that Plato talks about are examples of what are called abstractions. Love, which was the first example that we talked about, is an abstraction. What I mean by that is there's no physical thing in the world that I could point to, like a table or a chair, and say, this is love. It's not a physical reality, it's an idea. Because it is not a physical thing I can point to, like your phone, it is abstract. But here's the kicker: these forms that Plato talks about, like love or beauty or justice, even though they're abstract, for Plato, they are more real than the physical objects around us. The idea of love is more real, according to Plato, than a table or a chair. In fact, he argues that the physical world we see around us is actually a pale reflection of a truer world of forms. And the more our physical world can match up against the world of forms, the better our world is. Plato's world of forms is most famously and perhaps best illustrated by what's called the allegory of the cave. An allegory is an instructional story, and the allegory of the cave goes like this. Imagine that you have been chained up against a wall in a cave your entire life, so you've never actually been outside of the cave. Behind where you're chained up is a candle that is illuminating the cavern wall in front of you. There are objects moving back and forth in front of the candle, and you see their shadowy reflections on the cave wall. But those reflections are all you have ever seen. You've never seen the actual objects that are casting the shadow. And so for you, because you've spent your entire life chained up this way, those shadows are what is real. You don't know that there is something real that they are reflecting. The point that Plato's trying to make is that he thinks that this is what life is actually like for most of us. We don't know the truth, we only see its shadowy reflection. And the reason we don't know the truth is because we don't see or experience or understand the world of forms. We only see its shadowy reflection in the world around us. And we mistake those shadows for truth. For Plato, we are the prisoners chained up against the cave wall because we don't see the truth in the world of forms. Now imagine that you're set free from your chains. You wander out from the cave and you see the sun for the very first time. It's overwhelming, terrifying at first, but gradually your eyes adjust and you begin to see the world for what it actually is. You learn the truth. For Plato, this is what it's like for the philosopher to encounter truth for the first time. Now that you're free, it's your duty to go back in the cave and to set others free. But here's the thing. They've been chained up against a wall in a cave their entire lives. They think you're crazy. They even violently resist being set free. You can see how the fate of Plato's mentor, Socrates, plays into his feelings here, because Socrates was killed at the hands of the Athenian authorities. For Plato, Socrates was the philosopher trying to free people from the shackles of their bondage, and the Athenian authorities were the ones violently resisting being set free. Plato's allegory of the cave is in the middle of a much longer work called The Republic, which is usually considered Plato's most important work. In The Republic, Plato reflects upon what the ideal form of justice is and uses that to try to come to a better understanding about what an ideal society would look like. A perfect society is known by the Greek word utopia. But how to create one? In modern day America, we assume that democracy is the best system. But Plato infamously was opposed to democracy. Remember, he thinks that most people are chained up against the wall of a cave seeing nothing but shadows. Why would you trust those people with power? For Plato, democracy was mob rule. Democracy is the system that led to Socrates being executed. So what to do? In Plato's understanding, absolute goodness is equated with truth, and philosophy is the path to the truth. And so, not surprisingly, Plato strongly believed that the people who should be entrusted with power were the philosophers. This is a concept that Plato calls the philosopher king. Some people claim that Alexander the Great, who was tutored by Plato's greatest student, Aristotle, could be considered a philosopher king. Others point to the Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius, who we'll study in a future class. But Plato's true legacy is in his ideas. Plato believed in the power of reason, and that's an idea that has taken hold through the millennia. Plato believed that reason was more important and more trustworthy than the information we receive through the five senses, because he believed that the world of forms was more real than the world we see around us. That's a truly bold claim, but by placing human reason above everything else, Plato planted a seed that has influenced Western civilization for thousands of years. Plato established what many people consider one of the world's first true universities, a school called the Academy. There, students would engage in dialogue and debate and learn about geometry, mathematics, rhetoric, philosophy, and more. Plato's greatest student, Aristotle, who we'll learn about in the next lesson, also established the foundation for Western science that lasted thousands of years, through the Middle Ages, right up until the scientific revolution and the Renaissance. In today's reason science dominated world, it's difficult to exaggerate how great of an influence Plato had on the way that we think and the way that even you and I think. Plato's world of forms might seem like a strange idea to you, but does he have a point? Do you think there's another world truer than this one, or do you think this world is all there is? These are some of the questions that Plato's philosophy present to us, and they remain relevant right up until this day. This concludes Lesson 3 of Big Ideas Throughout History.